there's this big angle that I would like to put across to you today, is that it's not risk work for risk work's sake, but it's risk work for obtaining work. And I once gave a lecture at the University of Tut, Ian Alexander and them's class, and it was a Friday afternoon session, and my subject, they said I could choose any subject, just speak on an anecdotal thing. And I spoke on the subject of how to stay alive in the architectural profession, which basically boils down to the fact that if you've got no work, you've got no company. So my introductory statement is that if you take architecture as a profession, it's still basically a business. You have to make a salary, at least a salary, if you're completely on your own. And if you start adding a few staff members and you start having a little office, it becomes a business. And if you ask yourself, what's the definition of a business? The best one I ever heard was having a chat with Anton Rupert one evening over dinner. I was very fortunate to meet the man, a fantastic guy. And I asked him, what's the definition of a business? And he gave it to me like just simply over the table. He said, man, the definition of a business is when you provide services of goods for the public at large or the world at large at a profit. Now, that is the definition of any business. I mean, if you even go and work for a salary, you're going to go and provide goods and services to your boss if you're an employee. At the end of the month, he's going to remunerate you, and you're going to have to try and make that your salary, which is technically your profit. So if you take that as a baseline, that is where I wanted to start this subject of the discussion point of this morning. So I actually sat down last night and I just jotted down a few items that I wanted to just run through so I don't forget. I will also leave them for you at the door. And there's also 2 other documents which I'll speak a bit about later that you might take with you and embroider on those ideas if you are essentially in the position of architecture where essentially you have to get your work from the commercial market. And it's this. Well, I just want to go back one point. So I remember that fish and chip story, my dad going there and collecting this lovely brown envelope, and he came running to the car and he was very excited, and I think it was Baragwanath extension something. I can vaguely remember. But anyway, be that as it may, in days like that, I think have to a certain extent passed, excepting for some of the new generation people. They still get work from public works, and they still get work in brown envelopes. You still have to get onto a list, but there's all sorts of other things also involved. There's personalities involved, who you know, and it wasn't very different in those days either. It was just maybe different people in different places, but it was more or less the same. But we made a decision as architects, me and Andre Krieger, I just have to tell you that story quickly, why we went into the commercial sphere of architecture. Why didn't we persist of wanting to do governmental work, or as we called it, that sort of easy come, easy go work? Is we took the guts after 3 years of business. I picked up the phone and I found the head of public works. I can't remember his name. All I remember, he was like a German guy with great silver hair. And Andre and I walked into his office. He made us wait in half an hour, which I thought was really lousy. We walked into this guy's huge office at Public Works. He had this big staatsdiensttafel with a red carpet, 2 big flags behind him, president's face behind him, and we sat there and we looked at him like this. Now we were like 30 years old then, because I was 27 when we started the business. Now I didn't know what was going to come here, but it was like going to see the schoolmaster, you know, it's terrible. And we sat down, and he said, "Wat kan ek vir julle 2 Here doen?" And well, it didn't take very long for us to say to him. I got up and usually had to do a bit of the talking, and I said, "Well, you know, we've been in practice 3 years. This is our business name." He said, "Ja, ken jou van? Your pa was ook architect." Yeah. It helped a little bit. And so I said to him, "We've been in 3 years now, and we thought we have now got enough experience to offer our services to public works to be perhaps considered for some small job, an alteration or whatever." And he gave us a look like that under these thick eyebrows, and he said, "Boeties, julle gaan nog 10 jaar lank wag voor julle 'n projekkie gaan kry. As jy dink jy het ondervinding, dan wil ek net vir jou sê jy weet niks." Well, that was more or less the sum total of our experience. We had no tea, nothing, out the door. And we walked in the passage, and I remember, I bumped Andre like this in the lift. I said, "Andre, ons moet maar vergeet van hierdie goed. Hier gaan ons die werk kry." So of course he started working in Johannesburg. We opened up an office there, and through his community people we started meeting people, and slowly we started gaining a little bit of momentum. People like Eric Chapman, who used to be a big developer in town. Some of you might have known him. I did his house as a student when I was with Peter Hattings. He called me in one day and said, "Look, I've got something small for you to do." Gave me some nice business lessons, told me a few things about architecture that I would have repeated to some of the young students, but he told us 2 things. He said, "Look, There's always space for a medium-sized quality architecture. There are big firms and small firms. Position yourself in the middle somewhere. That's the one thing he said. The other thing he said is, you must do good presentations. He said, clients don't understand black and white drawings. He said, you worked with Peter. He always came here with his bump. He never even bothered to color it in, but I could at least lead a plan because he was an electrician by trade. He said, do color drawings. People want to see color drawings. He said, you must entice them with your projects. And if you're working for anybody who's going to build a building for himself, remember the my building syndrome. And I asked him, well, Mr. Chapman then, what is that? He said, people have got an ego about themselves. They want to know they're building my building. And I've seen it through the 30 years of practice. If you're working with anybody, especially bigger corporations, you know, slightly bigger ones, say like Nestle's or Exaros or those sort of people, you pick that up very, very quickly, who's the boss, and you pick it up very quickly. If he's got a wow factor about his building and he really likes what he's seeing, he will continue with the project. In fact, I saw it just a few weeks ago when the firm was doing a presentation to Exaro, how that went. So just coming back to that, then I would like to start off and say, now, what's this definition of this so-called risk work? And I'm going to read it to you because I wrote it down. I'm saying it's a contractual agreement and obligation, not sommanet, between an architect and an employer to prepare a design proposal for a building project on the basis that the employer will provide the opportunity. Remember, I'm talking about a commercial world here, not a hospital for public works. They know what they want to do and they know where they want to do it. And they'll only employ people who can do hospitals. So they're not going to employ a new guy who says, listen, I want to do hospitals. You're not going to get that learning curve job. But be that as may, he will provide the opportunity and the architect will provide the necessary preliminary design and documentation services. The architectural services will be provided on an interim basis at no cost, or at limited cost. We'll talk about that in a moment. Or alternatively at a later cost to be determined. But only when the employer converts the design to income. That's how the lawyers and the auditors put it that way. When it's converted to income, at that stage the architect will be formally appointed and at that stage he will be remunerated. But at no stage is it a question of fly by night, doen gou vir my 'n skemaatjie en ons hoop maar dit werk uit nie. If you take that approach, that's true risk work. That's virtually the same as what Ken was doing here a moment ago. It was a good example. They came, they sponsored the meeting, they showed us what they do, and they didn't do it on a philanthropical basis. That's a stainless steel business. They want to sell stainless steel. They're hoping that you guys would have just put it in the back of your minds and start using stainless steel or remember what stainless steel to use, but you must use stainless steel. So what they're actually doing is they're putting money up front. They're investing money with the intention of getting a return. If you take that approach to the so-called risk work, then I think one can move on and say, okay, now how do you manage this thing? Because I think that's the biggest difficulty, is how to manage it. On what scale do you manage it? So where does this concept come from? I think the world to some extent has changed. I do believe it's gone much further back than where we came from. In fact, when Peter invited me, he said, look, you know, we wanted you to come because you and Corné de Leeuw started this nonsense in our country. Well, I emphatically want to deny that. We had no work. We had to create work. We had to find work. We had to fight with the Jewish community. In fact, only many years, 10 years later, a guy called Pat Flanagan, who some of you might know from, was RMS Seifert then and now Flanagan and Gerard. He one day called me into a lunch meeting. He said, I want you to come and have lunch with us. I want to meet this guy or this company and come and have lunch with us. I want to meet you. So when we got there, he said one thing. He said, I want to tell you something. The reason why we want to meet you is because you're the only Afrikaans guys that have ever made it in Johannesburg amongst the Jewish community. And only then did I realize it was Bentel Abramson and it was Margolis Duke Smith and it was SKM, at Celsius Kinnear and Mitchell, and it was just Jewish firms from top to bottom. We were the only guys there. How we did it was on performance. We had two things in our arsenal then. It was just the beginning of computers coming into the market, and my partner then, Andre Krieger, and I'll give him the credit for that, that was his passion in life, besides nice cars and helicopters and other things that gave us lots of other troubles. But computers he understood. And we used that, was our platform, that nobody could work these things and they didn't have the skills and they didn't have the tools to show people. That was the one thing. And the other thing was just, you know, absolutely plain hard work and doing good presentations. That was something that I took from Eric Chapman to this day. I think it's true to know, and those of you who are competing with Boogertmans, I can stand outside the door now, you will know that if you're competing against Boogertmans, you are going to be up against serious competition in terms of quality of design and quality of presentation. And I think many, many times Boogertmans have won, let's call it tenders, competitions, whatever you want to call them, on the basis that, or tender invitations, on that basis. So it's so in commercial terms, it's an architectural shop, and you have to operate it at that. It's not only akin to architecture. Many of the things that we learned as practicing architects at Boogertmans, and Bob van Bebbers here will know you, we had to introduce new styles of management when our firm almost went through a collapse time. There was a time where we technically were insolvent, not shy to say it. We basically had helicopters and aeroplanes and all sorts of other businesses that we were trying to do together. And we just didn't get it right, because obviously we didn't stick to our knitting, and we lost a lot of money. And at that time we had to go and seek advice from not other architects, because nobody had the sort of practice that we had in terms of size and so forth. So we went to the engineers. So I had a good friend, Francois Swart, who's the ex-CEO of Big in Africa. And you know, we sort of sat around a campfire a bit, and you sort of like talking, what would you do, how would you sort this out, and so forth. And we learned a lot from them in terms of systems, of how to manage and properly manage a company, because you can't just start and finish and hope it's all going to work out well. You have to work at what I said earlier on, at a profit. And to make that profit in architecture is really difficult. It's one of the most difficult businesses to run, I believe, because of this issue of late payments, delayed payments, future work, and only coming off stream later, and you're producing all the production work. It's very, very difficult to do that. But Big in Africa have got a slogan. I think they use it today still. They say, we're a business, and our business is engineering. That's how they operate. And if you think architects do schemes that are a little bit out of the world, they do things like, I'll give you an example. I don't know exactly where it was, but I know it's in Rustenburg. They would go and plan a sewer works, a complete sewer works. That's now different to how I would imagine a normal engineering firm would work. They would plan it. They would organize how its cash flows are going to work. They would get guys from the bank like RMB and Absa Bank to fund it. And they would get this whole plan sorted out from design to operations. And then they would go to a city council on an unsolicited basis and say, you folks don't have money, here's a sewer works. It was actually built, it's running. I know it for a fact. Because some of the people that Big in Africa employ are like ex-RMB people. They're financial people. They know nothing about engineering. They're financial engineering specialists. And they do things like that. So they would, on an unsolicited basis, they would go and do that. And he always used to say to me, Henk, our fees were like pocket money. They don't even talk about the fees. They don't even argue whether it's engineering tariff scale plus 10 or less 10 or whatever. It's not even a discussion. That's the one way of looking at it. Now, I don't think any architectural firm, and certainly we didn't, went to that level of planning a building, getting tenants for it, marketing it, going to somebody, finding the funding, and then offloading it at somebody like a Sanlam. I don't think anybody's ever tried a thing like that, because then technically you're a developer, and then you start competing with your clients. In their case, it's different. So there are engineering companies that for sure also do what we would normally term risk work. I mean, there's massive money that goes into those things. PPP tenders in a certain way are a little bit structured like that. Some of you might have been involved in PPP tenders. We've done one or two as architects where we didn't get paid, and we almost lost our company again. That was the famous DTI project, which architects still cry about what happened there. But be that as it may. So there's a couple of misconceptions of this risk work thing that I would like to just highlight. The one is that architects work for free. No ways. If you're doing it the wrong way. The second is architects are misused and their skills are abused by clients. They will only abuse you if you don't treat it like business-like. Business-like people like working with business-minded people. You can actually confront a client on a humble way and say to him, let's talk how we're going to do this risk work job for you. It can be done. We'll talk about that in a moment. Then this thing about clients that renege on their agreement, because basically it's a tacit agreement. You come and help me design something, I'll give the land or the option on the land, we're going to try and do a shopping center. If we get it tenanted, if we get it funded, we build it, you get the job, and I'm the developer. That's most the essence of what a risk work project is. Not like I was explaining to somebody just now, one guy once approached me and said, I must do a house for him on spec, as he put it. And I said, well, why do you want to do that? He said, no, well, I'm going to ask another 2 architects. And then I've got 3 designs to choose from. Well, you know, in my commercial mode, I said to him, look, sorry, we don't work like that. Go and select the architect you want, and then appoint him and get the job done. Nobody's going to do a house on risk. And the simple reason is you can't sell that product to somebody else. If a guy does a shopping center and he asks you to do the shopping center and it doesn't work out, you can still perhaps take that shopping center to another developer and you potentially could get a job out of it. That happened to us many, many times. So the job is recyclable, is another very important aspect that I think one must do. Some people have said it's a waste of time. Well, you know, it's like going fishing, sitting on the side there and saying, well, as geen vis in die dam nie, gaan maar net hier sit. Another oak will say, well, maybe it's our vis, ek gooi maar asie in, you never know. And he catches a moose, a big fish. So it can't be a waste of time, because if you put time into something, you must expect a return. If it's not then, it must be later. We'll talk about that in a little moment. And then this thing of, I used to call it no duck, no dinner. If there's a duck, there must be a dinner. And if there's no dinner, there could perhaps be another dinner later on. So whatever project you tackle on this basis of doing it on an investment sort of basis, I don't like that word risk, because it sounds like you're dealing with insurance issues. It's you investing time into something that you must expect a return on. Every single project that you do, unless there's a political reason for it, must be with the intention that it will happen. Otherwise, and I'm going to win if there's a competitive situation. And the competitive situation has arisen from the tenant market in the commercial world. Now, somebody was asking earlier on what has changed. Well, big tenants in commercial world have basically come to the point where they can pick and choose. So they approach 4 developers and they get 4 designs and they get 4 proposals. And everybody thinks they're wasting time, which is true to some extent, and then only one guy gets the job. So if you're doing a project on that basis and your project with your client is not successful, that particular job must have a dinner, that duck must come a little bit later. And I think there are lots of examples in the practice that we were in that actually happened. I mean, if I take a project that Bob's working on now for Ernst & Young in Johannesburg, I don't took 6 years of doing scheme after scheme after scheme. And the one day the duck came. But the land never disappeared, the developer never disappeared, the commitment never changed. And even though there was no paperwork involved. So you've got to be very careful how you invest your time. You must make sure about that. I'll just allude to that a little bit longer just now. So basically, the one thing I wanted to say is that I find it hard to understand people that say, well, why do you invest all this time and money in projects that may or may not happen, and you don't do competitions? Because competitions are fine. Now, I don't understand how architects do competitions, especially worldwide competitions. If you take the risk value of an international competition, and even worse, a South African competition, your chances of winning that project is very, very slim, rather than going in with a developer doing a scheme on risk for maybe a tenant market where there are 3 or 4 tenants, or one tenant looking for 2 or 3 spaces. Because that competition is like 1 out of 4. But if you're going into the competition market, like you, and I must say for a fact, we were often asked in the office by some of the younger architects, can't we participate in this, you know, whatever it might be, especially these sort of semi-political things. And I'd say, guys, we don't have time to waste. And they say, yeah, but I said, there can be 100 oaks that are going to want to do the job. First of all, you're going to do a job. Number 1. Number 2 is you're going to put that effort in and the money. Number 2 is they're going to employ a committee of jurors. What do you call it? Jurors, yeah. They will most probably take some intellectual oak from the varsity, another prof from here, and maybe, but certainly not a practicing architect, and some star architect who's known for doing, let's call it, these sort of special government projects. Okay, that's the committee. You don't get a chance to present it. You can't tell your story. And you'll know from a design point of view, every building has got a story. Whether you call it a theme or a story, but every building must have something special. Otherwise, your client will just say, well, it's just another building. It's like a Woolworths building. You know, it's grey and brown. Doesn't excite me. It doesn't make me unhappy, but it's somewhere maar net another building. Everybody's looking for champagne with beer money. So you have to produce something exceptional every time. So every building has to have a story. So if you can't go and present a scheme, and that was the bottom line that I always used as a benchmark. If I can't present our project and make use of the technology that we have, or the design skills that we have, or the intellect that we have, or the research that we did, and can't tell our story, we're not participating. I mean, there was even one competition where they said you can only do your drawings in this way, and this way, and this format, and this format, no computer renderings, no flybys, no models. and then put all these restrictions on. And I said, well, it's like telling a guy to come to a race and tell him he's only allowed to come with a Volkswagen, it's only allowed to have 4 wheels, it's not allowed to have a zooped up engine. There's no margin of improvement above another firm to make you a winner. So I'm very skeptical about competitions, and I put them in the same category. I think they are very risky projects to take. You can do them in slightly bigger firms because you can afford to lose the money. And everybody's had a good time designing a building that somebody else won anyways. And the only thing that's not nice about it is you feel bad because you always think your design was better. So I think those are the couple of misconceptions that I think one must deal with, and that's not what risk work is all about. You have to start looking, okay, what is the risk of risk work? That's the question, is analyzing the risk that's involved with the so-called risk work. So I think there are a couple of very important factors there. The one is the client's reputation. And the client's reputation, especially to previous projects. There are certain clients that you can work for, you call them repeat clients. Those are the dreams of most architects. When you've got a smaller practice, it's very hard to get a job from Sanlam Properties or Investec Properties or however. But as your firm grows and you get a chance to get in there, those are the kind of companies that you want to work for. The companies that do repeat business. Because it's very hard to find a client. I put it in the same category that I always tell my children is hard to make a rand. It's even harder to make a pound. And it's just as hard to make a dollar. It's hard to make a rand. Just think about it in its analogy. It's not easy to make profit. So you want to work with clients that have got a good reputation. The big question I always ask is, if I have to do something on risk, is, has the client bought the land? That's a crucial question. There are some developers that buy on a speculative basis. Options. Dangerous ground. Okay? You can still do the work because if that doesn't happen and the option expires and your job doesn't come off, you have got claim to your work and you can go elsewhere and try and help somebody else make the project work, although it's a very, very low chance that that would happen. So the main thing is the type of client that you're going to deal with and whether he's got a repeat business opportunity and whether he owns the land. That's a big risk factor out of the way, because even if the project that is being proposed on that site, argument's sake, again, a tender for a tenant over the spectrum of 3 or 4 developers, you will always still have perhaps a second chance, or a third chance, or a fourth chance. Then the sustainability of the site for the proposed project. You know, if a guy comes to you, like I had once a request, he came with a picture of Venice, and he came with a Hartbeespoort Dam. And he came to me with these 2 things, and he said, I want to build a scheme at Hartbeespoort Dam on the western side, I still remember, and it's got to look like Venice, with canals and all that stuff. And I thought to myself, you know, you could perhaps do that at the waterfront, maybe in Canal Walk or someplace like that, but Hartbeespoort Dam, of all places, you can't turn that into a Venice. And so the simplest way to get rid of those sort of guys is say, yes, of course we can do it for you. There are 2 ways. We're just extremely busy at the moment, but we can do it for you in November. This is July. Alternatively, you'll say, oh, but he can't wait so long. You'll say, okay, then there's no problem. Then we just unfortunately have to charge you a fee. In November, we could do it on a speculative basis, but now, you want it now, we can make you can we make you a proposal? And invariably, the guy will say yes, and then you just give him a proposal that you know he can't afford, and then it's out of the window. And without being unpolite, without telling the guy he's stupid, without telling the guy he hasn't got a business brain, it will never work, and sort of being arrogant about it, you just have to move those guys out of your life. But reputable developers with repeat business who own their land are usually guys that don't come with stupid requests like that. They are people that know what they want to do. And they are the kind of people that you would ideally want to work for. I think also that the type of development and the marketability of the development. If a guy wants you to do a project that can't work, argument's sake, a guy says, I want you to do me. There's a beautiful one the other day in the newspaper, and I'm not sure who's been involved, so if I'm tramping on your toes, forgive me, but this so-called high-rise building in Centurion. You know, if any of you have been involved in high-rise buildings, even in the concept design of those, they are most probably the most difficult buildings to pull off in the South African market. So don't build skyscrapers, build ground scrapers, build lower buildings, but skyscrapers of 100 floors and stuff like that. In Centurion, of all places, not Sandton or someplace like that, Just doesn't make sense. If a guy comes to you and he says, look, you know, I want you to do a scheme on this site, I want to use a bulk factor of 10 or 15, and I want you to do all this stuff, you must just rather say, look, I can't support it, I don't think it's sustainable. Either we do a design, or what I would usually do is I'll say, I would do a quick sketch to tell you what I think the correct bulk of the site is, and what I think you could do here. Because architects also often get the request, and I'm sure many of you have had that, where a guy actually takes you to a site, like we've had recently in Mauritius, where the guy says, see this big piece of sugar cane here? This moose, a big piece of sugar cane, 250 hectares, what do you think we can do with it? They don't know what they want to do. Then you can go home and you can go and prepare a scheme like we did. Conceptually, it was a bit of a dream, but today it's built, and it's being built carrying on, because we had the vision, we had the knowledge, the client had the land, and he had the faith in that we could do it, and we knew the client could deliver because they were a very reputable client. So sometimes you have to analyze it. Sometimes you get a brief that's not sustainable or can't be done. Sometimes you get a brief that's no brief. And I'm not always sure which is the easier one to deal with. But I think the one to tell the guy what's wrong also helps the client understand that you know your business. If you tell a guy, for instance, you can't do more than 3 basements in Brooklyn, can't be done. You won't get your scheme to work. The rental won't work out. Here are the figures. Quickly calculate it. Show him and say, man, drop your bulk from 1 to 8, go 3 basements deep, go 4 floors. Now there's one more fight left, the neighborhood. And you sort of work yourself around these kind of commercial issues. So you have to work through those factors. You also have to have the knowledge and experience. If a guy would arrive to you and say, look, you're my chummy, because that often also happens. I want to do a hospital. You know, I really want to do a hospital. I see all the oaks are doing medical at the moment. Everybody's doing hospitals. Then you must have the guts to say, look, either we're going to partner with somebody, or we're going to find a co-partner, but we're not going to do a hospital. Or we're not going to do a prison PPP tender. We know nothing about prisons. We don't want to know anything about prisons. And we don't want to do a PPP tender anyway. So you can sort of work yourself out of the things that you don't have the right knowledge of. And it's surprisingly for me over the many years of working, how many guys come to you and ask you to do buildings that they know you are not familiar with. Like doing a hospital, if you actually do more shopping centers and retail and corporate offices, a hospital is another kettle of fish altogether. You know, it's, you must go to Adrian or somebody like that, or go and partner with him and then say, look, kom ons bou 'n lekker groot hospitaal. And then I think also the location of the project, whether it's local or international, is a very big factor. The guy says to you, I've got a site in Gabon. You know, I think we should go and do a shopping center in Gabon. Well, you know, to go to Gabon is a week's travel, and then we must still want you to pay your own flight ticket. You must decide if you want to go and work in Gabon or whether you'd rather go and work in Mossel Bay. It's 2 very different worlds out there. And what I've seen over the time coming is that when we started working in Dubai, originally when we were there, we went with a developer and with a big project. So it was a given, so we could spend the money to start operating there and build a practice there and so forth. And when we were there, we realized we're not making any money, so we said, let's go a little bit further, try and do a bit of work in Kuwait and all these sort of places. We did find initially that the Arab fraternity would pay us for doing a concept. They would pay you 100,000 rand or dollars or whatever, dirhams or whatever it is, and they'd ask you to do a proposal because they were seeing the kind of work that you were doing there, and on the basis of the previous work and the quality of the work, they would ask you to do a proposal. And we did quite a few schemes like that where we actually got paid. But after the first year or 2, the Americans were there, a couple of other oaks were there, and they all started doing the so-called risk work. Then a guy, Arab, would say to you, listen, I want you to do me a desert lodge or something like that, and I want you to do a design, and you know there is serious, serious competition. If you think there's competition here, overseas in places like Dubai, it's serious, serious competition. I wouldn't advise anybody to go and work in that environment. You will get work, you will get turnover, you won't make profit. I can tell you now, you will not make a profit there. You can even speak to guys like Wilson Bailey Holmes who are contractors, who they just said there's just no margin there. So then they ask you to do that, and then you have to put the money out. And then you know, if you don't put a really good design with really quality drawings, models, drawings, everything, you just simply won't make it. So you're going to go and spend 300,000 rand on a presentation, get on an aeroplane, fly there, fly back, stay in a hotel. They might pay the flight costs if you're lucky, might pay the hotel cost if you're lucky, but the rest is no duck, no dinner. Now, that duck, to get that dinner going, is quite a big exercise. So I think the location of where the project is also has a lot to do with how much risk you're taking. You know, if a guy says, let's work in Sandton, I own the land, we get this one, we don't, doesn't matter, we'll get the next one. that's a great location. But if he says, let's go and build something in Piet Retief, or Delmas, or Ogies, a place like that, a little bit more risk. So you have to measure the risk. I think that's the most important thing of deciding. There is a counterbalancing factor, which is the most hard one, is how do you say no? Because you almost can't say no when a guy asks you to do a job, because if you have to weigh up, will this thing happen, won't it happen? And if it does happen, great, I've got work, but if it doesn't happen, I also lost a lot of money. So it's quite a hard decision, and I think it's very grey. It shades from light grey to dark black. You know, if I've given you the example of Gabon versus Sandton, that's light grey to dark grey. They're both risk, but the one is just much bigger risk, much more time consuming, and so forth. So that takes you to the next point. Guys asked you, and you said, okay, let's talk a little bit about this job. You shouldn't just go fire away and do the job. The only time you can take on a project on a risk basis without worrying about it is when you've done a lot of work for that client before. I mean, if you had to take the kind of letter that I'm going to leave for you, if you'd like to take it as an example, that you can give to a new client, okay, who you don't trust so very much, you can use a letter like that. And the one letter that I'm going to show you that you can take with is one that we actually used on a project in Middelburg. I won't go into too much details, but the client reneged on us. He sold the land, fortunately, to another developer friend of ours. I asked the developer whether I could do the job, and he said, no, he's already committed to another architect, so we lost the project. But I had this letter. And he wouldn't pay. In fact, he wouldn't talk to me for a long time, 3 months. And we wrote him nice letters, can't we talk, you know, we know you've lost your job, and, you know, we will not hold you to the contract that we signed, but, you know, can I come and see you? He just wouldn't answer. So one day I got fed up, asked the partners permission to take him on. We'd never taken on a client with a lawyer. Went to a lawyer. The lawyer looked at this. He said, this is watertight, watertight. Let's take the guy on. Well, he paid. And it was a large sum of money. It was 800,000 Rand for a shopping center concept. I actually think we made money because we certainly didn't spend 800,000 Rand. But the way the letter was structured, we got our money out. But if a client is a client that you've worked a lot for, and you say to him, listen, won't you just sign this piece of paper? He would say, listen, don't you trust me? You know, if you don't trust me, you tell me, are you part of the team or you're not part of the team? Get out of here, kind of attitude. So you have to assess also when that situation arrives. I discussed it with Nicole Labuskachnia yesterday when I said to him, Nicole, don't you guys have a sort of a letter of understanding or a memorandum of understanding when you tackle these big, let's call it commercial engineering projects, which are akin to architecture? I'm not talking about sewer works and roads. Those things aren't done on risk, well, not as far as I know. But anyway, he said, yes, we have such a letter. Well, he sent it to me, and I've made a copy of it for you. You'll just see the words Auricon have been removed, but you can have a look at that letter. Now, that's an engineering approach to a project on risk, and the other one is an architectural approach to a project on risk. And you'll see from the tone of the letter, the engineering one is much tougher, even deals with arbitration and all that kind of stuff if there's a fight. That's not the words you use in a letter of engagement with a client ever. In your contract, yes, but not in your initial engagement. The last thing you say to him is, if we're going to have a fight, it's going to be arbitration, or it's going to be this, or it's going to be that, and I'll give you notice, and I'm going to charge you interest on outstanding accounts. He doesn't want to hear that kind of stuff. Then he says, I don't want to deal with you. I don't know why it's like that, but it is like that. You've got to be nice and friendly and say, well, if you sell your land, then at least you've got to calculate the fee like this, and there'll be a little bit of a surcharge, and so forth. So I think you have to, when you talk to a client, you have to, first of all, agree on the scope of work. What does he need from you? So you don't do too much. You can do too little, or you can do too much. Invariably, you've got to do a bit more than what he asks for. Because invariably you say, ach nee man, net so vinnig geskets en so paar prentjies. You know that, when I hear that, I always say, oh, here we go, it's proper skets and proper prentjies, you know. You got to, what I usually ask the client is, by the way, when you've had a long discussion and all things look good, I say, by the way, do you have a budget for this stage? I can give you a guaranteed answer, 100% sure. He's going to say, no, geez, we haven't got money for this thing, we haven't budgeted for this. We say, well, geez, you know, I'm going to go and do some serious work here. Isn't there a possibility maybe that you could just help with the overhead cost a little bit, or the presentation cost? And then the guy would usually say, yeah, he said, you know what, we've got this tender against 3 other architectural firms. They're going to come up with all this great stuff. It's going to be Zen Prop, or it's going to be this oak, or that oak, or that oak. Then usually you can bend the client's ear and maybe you'd say, okay, I'll give you 100,000 Rand. Just go and do it. Now that 100,000 Rand for a presentation for a commercial building, sort of just cover your cost. Just cover your cost. Not profits or overheads in a certain sense, just basically the cost. Even if you can get that right, once a guy's paid, that's the rule of life. Once he's paid some money, he feels more obliged or obligated to you than paying no money. I think that's the principle. If you guys can just remember this name, if some of you want to jot it down. The best business book I've ever written is a book by Mark McCormack. He was the owner of IMG. He started this whole thing of taking top athletes' money and investing it and starting to make a business out of athletes' earnings. And his 3 first athletes were Gary Player, Arnold Palmer, and Jack Nicklaus. Those of you who remember golf will remember. And he wrote a book called What They Didn't Teach Me at the Harvard Business School. That's sort of like an anecdotal book that teaches you so many interesting things, or how to make an appointment, how to get to the boss, how to read the other guy's mind, how to negotiate a fee. Just one little thing he would say is never work in round numbers. Never quote a guy 1 million rand for the job. The job must be 1,235,000 rand 44 cents. He says people, when they deal in round numbers, they cut you down in round numbers. If you deal in odd numbers like that, the guy will just take off all the rands and cents and say, okay, I'll pay you 1.1 million. But if you say 1 million, he'll say, I'll pay you 900,000. It's a standard, normal negotiation thing. Any Indian guy that's a good businessman will tell you, man, we learned that before we're born. That's the way it works. So never deal in round numbers. But if you ever could get hold of this little book, it's called What They Didn't Teach You at the Harvard Business School. Yeah, it's quick to read. Little interesting stories of how guys do deals and how to be street smart. Because nobody teaches you that. You learn that over years. Unfortunately, and you know, 30 years experience takes 30 years. You can't get it anywhere else. So in a certain sense, those are the kind of things that you should do. So I think you have to talk a little bit about that. Then you have to talk about the program. How long is this thing going to keep running? Because some projects can go on and on and on and on. If I think some of the guys who've worked on proposals for the city council on the new head office and all the hours and hours and hours that go in, and other projects like that, with no sort of end in sight. You must be careful of those because it can eat up more money than you think, because later on you say you're so much into it that you can't sort of cut your costs anymore. So be careful of those. Try and assess the time that you're going to be doing it for 6 months. And then ideally if you can say, look, if this thing doesn't come off after 6 months, I'll do everything on risk. But if it doesn't come off in 6 months, then I don't want 100,000 rand if that you can't pay me that. Then you must give me 200,000. We cut our losses and we go away. Some clients are amenable to that because it's fair. Not all, some. Clients that are involved with their own money, let's call it the private developer, are as stingy as can come. Ask me, I've just become a sort of a developer. Guys who work for big corporations, use the name, Exaro, Kumba, whatever, those sort of guys, they're not working with their own money. They sort of get permission from Treasury down there somewhere to spend 100,000 and small money. Those are the guys that you can get a better chance. If they ask you to do a proposal for one of their buildings, it's a much better chance. Public companies are more amenable to pay some fees than what private companies are. But with private companies, generally you build up a camaraderie type of relationship. And as soon as a guy starts talking about my architect, you my architect, I'll ask my architect this, my architect will do that, you know you're in a good space. Just stick around. The jobs will come, the ducks will come, the dinner will come. But those other big corporations, you know, they take their plan up to the board and the board just says, not a chance. Are we spending 800 million on this building upgrade? Absolutely not. We'll go and do this or that or sell our building or make some other plan. All your money's gone. So when you're dealing with bigger corporations where there's a so-called board up there somewhere, be very careful and push for some income. They usually they're more business orientated and they are a bit more amenable to part with some money. That I can assure you. So those are the nice guys to work with because they cover your costs, and usually there's enough there to cover your costs. Plus, if the project doesn't go ahead, you actually can cover your cost plus maybe a small profit. The biggest risk, I think, is when a guy aborts his project, or even worse, if he sells it. Now, in the letter that I'm going to leave for you, I knew the guy was going to sell the land. I knew it up front that he couldn't afford the land. And his competition in this particular project, no secret, it was the Middelburg Mall that's just been finished by Flanagan and Gerard. Our client had the land, Flanagan and Gerard had other land. The two developers were fighting each other on rezoning. Flanagan and Gerard didn't have the best land, but they're the best developer. Our client had the best land, but he wasn't known in the market. If he went to Pick n Pay or Woolworths or Truworths or whatever, they don't know this guy. Mr. Flanagan to just pick up the phone and say, I've got this deal in Middelburg, are you in? How big do you want? And so the deal happens. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the guy signed the letter, and And when the time came, he couldn't afford his land. The bank cleared him out. What actually happened? The Flanagan and Gerard guys moved in. They had the cash, them and Moormans, and they grabbed the site, and then the project actually came off. And then fortunately, I had the letter. So the less you trust the client, the less you've worked with him before, the more, what will I say, unknown the person is, the better, the harder you should work to try and get some kind of a letter or agreement of understanding that if the project is sold, it's not your fault, it's not his fault, but invariably the next developer will not take you on. Like in this case, the developer had worked with MDS, which is their favorite architects, and when I asked for Flanagan, can I carry on with you guys, he said, sorry, and so you invariably won't get to work. So if a guy sells his land, you've got nothing. You put all the stuff in, and the next developer, that risk is that you will not get the job. So put something in writing that if he sells the project, and that's also not an unreasonable thing. You can put it in a somewhat simple letter. So I'm doing this project for you on risk. This is the basis of our agreement. And the one that I put together was slightly more elaborate because we were all fighting in our office with ourselves how to stop this thing of not losing money. Don't mind doing the risk. Don't mind doing the investment work, but we want the reward. And how do you ensure that? And I think that's the key thing of this whole morning's discussion is you mustn't be shy to put some work in. We saw it just now when Ken was here. I mean, Eric Chapman told me those years back, he said, remember, this why you must do your work properly and beautiful drawings. It's your shop window. I mean, if you go and buy clothes, you want to see the thing. Clients want to see their products. It's not, and they put those shop clothes in the shop window with the expectation that somebody would buy them. They invested the money, the machinery, the factory. That's what a business is all about. And if you equate an architectural practice to a business profession, because there is always a professional angle onto it, then I think you're going to be more successful in dealing with this heartache. Okay, so I'm just going to close off with a couple of general little comments. The first one is the affordability to do risk. It's natural that a smaller firm will battle to do risk work more than a bigger firm. A bigger firm has got a bigger turnover. You can just handle, you can spend, I don't know, big numbers per year. Don't want to divulge the numbers that we used to spend, but it was like in millions, not in hundreds of thousands, in millions, on work that we say is investment work, so-called risk work, but that's the term we all use. So the bigger the practice is, the more you can afford it. What's the ratio of that risk work to actual fee income producing work that you should aim for? Where do you know you're going off the radar screen? Now, in today's market, the guys are, I heard a guy say to the other day, I've done 69 projects, not one has come off. Now, he's a friend of mine. I just didn't have the heart to say to him, you better do something and find another job because you won't make it. You're going to go down the drain. You can't work like that. You can't have that kind of, what do we call, a hit rate. I would say the ideal is about 50-50. I don't know what the survey will say. You must actually have a bit more work in progress. And there's a difference between work in progress that's actual, that's just taking time to happen, and so-called real risk work. I think risk work is actually a percentage of that again. But basically, you must say income-producing work and work that is not yet income-producing work, but which will convert to income sometime in the next, let's call it 2 years, because that's how long some of these projects take, sometimes 3, sometimes 4 years even, should be around about 50-50. Your success rate must not be less than 60%. You have to get a success rate of high. So if you've got 10 projects on risk, call it that, 6 must convert. If you're sitting here at 2 or 3, you're either working for the wrong clients or the market is particularly bad and you've got to take real cognizance of what you're going to do, and you might have to start being a little bit selective. I think that's about the ratio. I would aim at 60-70% success rate. 70 is great. 60 is, I would say, what you should aim for. Under 60, you're going to go the wrong way. The availability and affordability of systems and technology. If you're a smaller firm and you don't have really good tools in-house and you've got to farm a lot of stuff out, you can operate like that, but then you've got to be selective as to who's helping you, and then you always stand in a queue. Argument's sake, you want to have a really nice perspective done of your proposed project, whether it be a house, a church, or whatever, and you haven't got those skills in-house, you've got to go and find somebody to do it. And they will charge you quite a steep number, but it's cheaper than having a salaried person with the machinery in your office, if you don't have a big turnover, obviously. And you might have to stand in the queue. The guy says, I can't help you now, and then you're too late, or the client didn't make the deadline or something like that. So I would say that those tools are very helpful because you have to distinguish yourself as a quality above the others. In a certain sense, I want to equate it to what we often talk about, the contractors. If you look at the contractors in the industry today, you take let's say the big five, Wilson Bailey, Mario Roberts, and those sort of guys. If you do an assessment, and I don't know how accurate the PMR assessment is, but essentially Wilson Bailey is 20% above the second guy. Not 1% or 2% or just sort of above the second guy. They're like seriously ahead. So if you want to be successful in this market where people are competing for work, either in competition, if that's the game you play, alternatively in invited sort of proposals for a tenant that's looking for a building and is applied to 4 developers, or a developer that's just simply wanting to go and market his scheme. He knows there's a tenant who happens to be a tenant in one of his buildings, and he wants to go and talk to this guy, and he wants to go and show him this beautiful new building. You have to have something in your shop window. It's got to be of the highest quality, you know. You can't sell a Mr. Price t-shirts when you want to actually sell him a Boss t-shirt. The one's got a logo on it, which is your firm's quality. It's got a name, it's got a brand. Oh, these guys are doing it, this must be good. And the second thing is the product can be more expensive. In fact, I heard a guy, the owner of Dis-Chem, don't know if any of you ever met him, a guy called Ivan with a very fancy Jewish surname. He's got an incredible business. I mean, you guys of you know, but Dis-Chem is an amazing business. And the other afternoon we were sitting talking to him about a shop, and we were talking about product range. And he told us that he's buying certain products, some from Holland, some from China, some from wherever. And he buys them in at a certain price. And he says, if you make the price too low, because he can sell it at, let's say, 100% profit, some cream or something like that. If you sell it at 100 Rand, you buy it for 100 Rand and you sell it for 100 Rand, it's 200 Rand. It won't sell. If you take that same product and you say it's 100 Rand, I'm selling it for 300 Rand, and you market it as a special, they fly. Now, that's a Jewish trick, if you've ever heard one. Huh? Now, architectures, you also got a few tricks like that. You have to sell a really, really good product. You have to tell a guy, this is champagne, and it's going to cost beer money. But you also got to produce it at that. So I think design is the bottom line to a successful business. I will always say that. I have said it. If you can't design or you haven't got good design skills, you won't make it in the industry. It's the most important thing. Everything is by design. In fact, the firm's slogan, I think it's still that, isn't it? Excellence by design. Nothing happens that's great or smart or good or quality that doesn't have a design thinking behind it. You don't just produce something. And that's another danger that I've seen so much in risk work. I said, I'll somehow do something. I just want to put my name in the hat. Don't bother. Your name will go to the bottom of the hat and never come out. Put the best in. So be selective, but put really, really good quality stuff in. Another thing that I've seen a lot is do not use your junior staff to do risk work. Take the best guy. It's like if you're in houses. Anybody of you know that does houses? I know there are a couple of you that do. My boss, Peter Hartung, always taught me one thing. He said, house architecture, you can't give it to a student. You've got to give it to the best guy in your office. And that's why if you want to do houses, rather make it a speciality. And I think many of you will agree with me, if there's one guy that's really got it right, is Johan Sleer. People will wait for him. A guy like Glenn Murcutt in Australia, when I had a little class with him, he told me people wait 5 years for a Glenn Murcutt house. 5 years, and they're patient. So, you know, when you're doing risk work, it's about quality. You cannot change your quality of your shop window. You can't do one day you're doing a Boss t-shirt type of design and the next day sommer net so vinnige enetjie op die kantlyn. Rather not do it. So all your work, all the time, has got to be at prime quality. Otherwise, the industry, as you know, is quite competitive. I just wanted to say one more thing, is I think at the end of the day, in our market, as more commercially orientated people, and those who are non-commercial, it's really the same. You have to build up a reputation, and you've got to be a reputable practice, and you ideally want to work with clients that do repeat work. Then this risk is minimized down to the bottom. And it actually is just, I think there's a word that they use in legal terms, dis uitgestelde vergoeding. If you don't treat risk work like that, then I think you're going to always be complaining and be argumentative about it, and guys are cutting my fees and so on. If you present yourself as a reputable firm that does a good quality job, it's a bietjie minder onderhandelbaar. A guy will still take you from 5% to 4.5 because that's what he always pays, and you argue a little bit and somehow you sort of find your way, and you try and get a reasonable fee. But I think those are the kind of thoughts that I would like to leave with you, and just like to leave you with one more thing, and it's all about the same thing of excellence. We did a building once for Ogilvy Mather, Soil, Tripp and Macon. Huge name. They are great advertising marketing agency kind of thing, and their boss man was a guy called Mr. Putter. He used to wear jeans and t-shirts but fly around in a Learjet all over the world. Very strong company. And he had just a little slogan on his desk, and it just said, "The people with the best people win." Now, if there's ever anything that I think is the essence of our business, it's still that. It's still about design, and it's still about having the best people.